The crystal cities of Velthara Prime shone like jewels under the twin suns. For 300 years, the Velthani had lived in peace on their beautiful world. They were tall, thin beings made of living crystal that changed colors with their emotions. When they were happy, they glowed soft blue. When they were sad, they turned gray like storm clouds. The Velthani had no weapons. They had no armies. They grew their food in gardens that glowed with gentle light, and they sang to each other in voices that sounded like wind chimes. Their cities were made of crystal towers that reached toward the sky, built not by machines but by their songs that shaped the crystal as it grew. Elder Velmara stood in the highest tower of the capital city, her crystal body flickering between blue and gray as she watched the sky. Something was wrong. The other elders had felt it too, a disturbance in the harmony of their world. Then the ships came. They dropped out of hyperspace like falling mountains. 12 massive warships, black as space itself, with hulls covered in sharp spikes and weapon ports. The ships belonged to the Korthak Empire, and they had come to take everything the Velthani had built. The Korthak were nothing like the peaceful Velthani. They looked like giant insects covered in metal armor, with 6 legs and mandibles that could bite through steel. They lived for war and conquest. To them, the Velthani were just weak prey, and their crystal cities were valuable resources waiting to be harvested. The bombardment began without warning. Green fire rained from the sky, turning ancient crystal spires into melted slag. The Velthani tried to flee, but they had nowhere to run. Their ships were for exploration, not war. Their technology was for creation, not destruction. In the first day, half the capital city was destroyed. The Korthak ground forces landed in massive drop pods, their metal boots crushing crystal gardens that had taken decades to grow. They set up mining equipment and began tearing apart the sacred sites where the Velthani elders had sung for generations. Elder Velmara gathered the surviving elders in the deep caves beneath the city. Her crystal body was gray with grief as she watched the destruction through the cave's crystal walls. "They will kill us all," whispered Elder Morin, his voice like breaking glass. "They do not even see us as people. To them, we are just things in the way of their mining. We must try to escape," said Elder Kinara. "Perhaps some can reach the other worlds, warn them what is coming." But Velmara shook her head. "Our ships are too slow. They would catch us before we left the system. And even if some escaped, what then? The galaxy is full of predators like the Korthak. Where would we go that would be safe?" Above them, they could hear the sound of crystal being shattered. The Korthak were destroying not just their cities, but their history. Every broken crystal held the songs of their ancestors. Every destroyed garden held centuries of careful growth. That night, as the Korthak celebration fires burned in the ruins of the capital, Velmara made a decision that would change everything. She gathered the surviving elders around the Great Resonator, a massive crystal that could send their songs across the galaxy. "We will send a message," she said, "not to any specific world, but to anyone who might listen. We will tell them what is happening here." "But who would care?" asked Morin. "The galaxy knows we are weak. They know we have nothing to offer in trade for protection." "Perhaps," said Velmara, "but we must try. Somewhere among the stars there might be those who believe mercy is more important than strength." They joined their voices together, singing into the Great Resonator with all the harmony they could manage. The crystal glowed brighter than it ever had before, sending their message racing across space faster than light itself. The message was simple. "To any who might hear our song of sorrow, we are a peaceful people facing extinction. We have no weapons, no soldiers, only the hope that somewhere among the stars mercy still exists. We do not ask for revenge. We do not ask for justice. We ask only that someone remember we tried to live in peace." The song traveled for weeks through hyperspace, growing weaker as it spread across the galaxy. Most who heard it ignored it. Wars and conquest were common in the galaxy. The strong took from the weak, and that was simply how things worked. But one species was different. On Earth, Dr. Park Minji was working the night shift at the Deep Space Monitoring Station when the message arrived. She was a small woman with kind eyes and quick hands that danced over her instruments as she tracked signals from across the galaxy. She spoke 17 alien languages and had dedicated her life to the dream of peaceful contact between species. When the Velthani song reached Earth, Dr. Park sat up straight in her chair. She had never heard anything like it. The message was not just words. It was pure emotion, pure desperation, pure hope dying in the darkness. She ran the translation program 3 times to make sure she understood correctly. Then she called her supervisor, and within an hour the message was being analyzed by Earth's best scientists and military leaders. The problem was Earth's reputation. Humans were known throughout the galaxy as Deathworlders, beings who had evolved on a planet so dangerous that they had become living weapons. Other species told stories about humans who could fight with broken bones, who formed emotional bonds with their weapons, who treated warfare like an art form. Most species were afraid of humans. They traded with Earth because human technology was advanced, but they never invited humans to their homeworlds. They certainly never asked humans for help with military problems, but Dr. Park Minji convinced the Earth Defense Council that this was different. The Velthani were not asking for human weapons or human soldiers. They were asking for mercy, and if humans could not show mercy to a peaceful species facing genocide, then maybe the galaxy was right to fear them. Captain Lee Taeho received his orders at dawn. He was a veteran of the Titan Wars, a man whose calm face hid the kind of experience that came from fighting in the deep cold of space. His crew was small but skilled. Dr. Park Minji as first contact specialist, Sergeant Kim Dae-sung for heavy weapons, and Lieutenant Choi Yuna as their pilot. Their ship was the Indomitable, an experimental stealth frigate that could jump through hyperspace without being detected. The official mission was reconnaissance and evacuation assistance. The unofficial mission was simpler: do whatever it took to help the Velthani survive. As the Indomitable prepared to jump to hyperspace, Captain Lee looked at the message from Velthera Prime one more time. The Velthani had pleaded with the stars for mercy. Earth was sending Deathworlders. He hoped they would understand the difference. The Indomitable dropped out of hyperspace behind Velthera Prime's largest moon, hidden from the Korthak sensors that swept the system like searchlights. Captain Lee Taeho stood on the bridge, watching the tactical display fill with red enemy contacts. 12 Korthak dreadnoughts hung in orbit around the planet like hungry vultures. "My God," whispered Lieutenant Choi Yuna from the pilot's seat. Even through the ship's sensors, they could see the fires burning on the planet's surface. Whole continents that should have glowed with crystal cities were now dark except for the orange light of destruction. Dr. Park Minji worked at her communication station, trying to find any Velthani signals. For hours there was nothing but the harsh static of Korthak military channels. Then deep underground she found it, a weak harmonic signal that barely registered on her instruments. "I've got them," she said. "There are survivors in the cave systems under the capital. But Captain, the readings are, there are so few of them left." Captain Lee studied the tactical display. The Korthak had positioned their ships to cover every escape route from the planet. Ground forces were spread across all the major continents, systematically destroying everything the Velthani had built. It was not just conquest, it was extermination. "Take us down, Lieutenant," he ordered. "Use the canyons to mask our approach. We need to make contact without alerting the Korthak fleet." Lieutenant Choi Yuna was one of the best pilots in the Earth Defense Corps, but even she found the flight challenging. The Indomitable skimmed through narrow mountain valleys, its stealth systems working overtime to hide them from Korthak sensors. Twice they passed directly under enemy patrol ships, close enough to see the weapon ports tracking back and forth. They landed in a hidden valley 50 kilometers from the cave system. Sergeant Kim Dae-sung checked his weapons while Dr. Park prepared her translation equipment. Captain Lee reviewed the mission parameters one more time, though he suspected they would be useless once they met the survivors. The walk to the caves took 3 hours through terrain that had once been beautiful gardens. Now it was a wasteland of melted crystal and burned earth. They passed the remains of Velthani art installations, delicate sculptures that had taken centuries to grow, now reduced to scattered fragments. The entrance to the cave system was hidden behind a waterfall that glowed with soft phosphorescence. Dr. Park's instruments detected the harmonic patterns of Velthani communication coming from deep underground. She adjusted her translator and sent a carefully crafted message. "We heard your song. We have come to help." The response came back immediately, but it was not the welcome they expected. The harmonic patterns were complex, but Dr. Park's translator decoded them clearly. "Go away. We called for mercy, not for predators." Dr. Park looked at Captain Lee with confusion. "They're afraid of us. They know what humans are. Captain Lee was not surprised. Throughout the galaxy, humans had a reputation that preceded them. Stories of the Titan Wars, where human soldiers had fought for weeks with wounds that would have killed most species. Stories of human pilots who could withstand gravitational forces that would liquefy other beings. Stories of humans who seemed to enjoy combat in ways that other species found deeply disturbing. "Keep talking to them," he said. "Tell them we're not here to hurt them." It took 2 hours of patient communication before the Velthani agreed to meet them. Elder Velmara finally appeared at the cave entrance, her crystal body flickering between gray fear and desperate hope. She was smaller than the humans had expected, barely reaching Captain Lee's shoulder, and there were cracks in her crystal structure that spoke of recent trauma. "You are the ones who answered our call," she said through Dr. Park's translator. Her voice was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, but there was sadness in every note. "But you are Deathworlders. You are the ones the galaxy fears." Dr. Park knelt down to be at the Elder's eye level. "Yes, we are Deathworlders. Yes, we come from a planet that tried to kill us every day for millions of years. But that same evolution that made us dangerous also gave us something else. We protect what we claim as ours. And we have decided to claim you." Elder Velmara's crystal body shifted to a color Dr. Park had not seen before, a deep purple that the translator identified as confusion mixed with hope. "You would fight the Korthak for us? But we have nothing to offer you. No weapons, no technology you do not already have. We are just peaceful beings who grow crystals and sing to our gardens." "That's exactly why we're here," said Captain Lee. "The galaxy has enough predators. It needs more gardeners." The Elder led them deeper into the caves where the surviving Velthani had gathered. There were perhaps 200 of them left from a population that had once numbered in the millions. They huddled together in chambers lit by the soft glow of their own bodies, their songs reduced to whispers of mourning. As they walked, Elder Velmara told them what had happened. The Korthak had not just come for conquest, they had come for sport. They were using Velthera Prime as a training ground for their younger soldiers, teaching them how to break the spirit of peaceful species. The systematic destruction was not efficient resource extraction. It was a lesson in how to commit genocide. They broadcast recordings of our dying songs to other worlds, the Elder said, her voice breaking like crystal in the cold. They want other peaceful species to know what happens to those who cannot defend themselves. Dr. Park felt something cold settle in her stomach. This was not just about the Velthani anymore. The Korthak were using this world as an example. A warning to every peaceful species in the galaxy: submit or be destroyed. Lieutenant Choi Yuna had been running reconnaissance flights during the conversation, her small scout ship invisible to Korthak sensors. When she returned, her face was grim. "Captain, you need to see this. The Korthak have military academies on 3 of their ships. They're bringing young officers here to watch the genocide. This is a teaching exercise." Sergeant Kim Dae-sung studied the tactical data from her flights. "Sir, they're overconfident. Their security is lazy. Their patrol patterns are predictable. They're not expecting any resistance." Captain Lee looked at the gathered Velthani, their crystal bodies dim with despair, and made a decision that would change everything. "We're not evacuating them," he said. "We're going to help them fight back." Elder Velmara's body flashed bright red, the color of shock. "Fight? But we know nothing of violence. We have no weapons, no soldiers. We do not even understand how warfare works." "You don't need to understand warfare," said Dr. Park gently. "You just need to understand something else. You're not alone anymore. We're going to teach the Korthak that picking on peaceful species is a very dangerous hobby." The Elder was quiet for a long moment, her crystal body cycling through colors too complex for the translator to decode. Finally, she spoke. "In our oldest songs, there are legends of the Sky Guardians, beings who would come from the stars to protect those who could not protect themselves. But they were just stories, dreams we sang to comfort ourselves in the dark." Captain Lee smiled, and for the first time since arriving on Velthara Prime, it was not a gentle expression. "Elder Velmara, those stories are about to become real. But first we need you to help us understand something. Can your people coordinate without electronic communications?" "Of course," she said, confused. "We sing to each other across great distances. Our harmony connects all Velthani on the planet instantly." Sergeant Kim Dae-sung looked at Captain Lee with growing excitement. "Sir, that's perfect. They can be our intelligence network. The Korthak will never detect harmonic communications. Dr. Park was already working on the implications. If we can coordinate with the Velthani across the planet, we can hit multiple targets simultaneously. Make it look like there's a full-scale resistance movement. There will be, said Captain Lee. By the time we're done, the Korthak are going to learn something new about Deathworlders. We don't just fight to win, we fight to make sure bullies think twice before picking on peaceful species. Elder Velmara looked around at her people, then back at the 4 humans who had answered their desperate call. You would do this for us? Risk your lives for beings you barely know? Lieutenant Choi Yuna answered before Captain Lee could speak. Elder, that's what humans do. We're the species that adopts stray animals and fights wars to protect people we've never met. It's not about knowing you. It's about what's right. For the first time since the Korthak arrived, Elder Velmara's crystal body glowed with pure, bright blue, the color of hope returning to a world that had thought it was lost forever. The first lesson Captain Lee Teho taught the Velthani was something no other species in the galaxy understood about humans. They did not just fight with weapons and ships, they fought with their minds. Warfare is not about having the biggest guns, he explained to Elder Velmara, as they studied maps of Korthak positions in the crystal caves. It's about making your enemy afraid to use theirs. For 3 days, Lieutenant Choi Yuna flew reconnaissance missions in her scout ship, mapping every Korthak position on the planet. She learned their patrol schedules, counted their supply drops, and identified their communication relays. The Korthak never saw her coming or going. To them, she was just another shadow in the sky. Dr. Park Minji worked with the Velthani to create something that had never existed before, a resistance network. The crystal beings could sing to each other across vast distances without using any technology the Korthak could detect. Within hours, every surviving Velthani on the planet was connected in a web of harmonic communication that stretched across continents. Sergeant Kim Daesung prepared for something he had not done since the Titan Wars. Asymmetric warfare against a technologically superior enemy. He studied the Korthak supply lines, identified their weak points, and began making plans that would have impressed his old instructors at the military academy. The Korthak had made one critical mistake. They had become lazy. For 300 years, the Korthak Empire had conquered peaceful species who offered no real resistance. Their soldiers were used to enemies who either surrendered immediately or fought with primitive weapons that could not penetrate Korthak armor. They had never faced an enemy that struck from the shadows and disappeared without a trace. The first attack came at night. The Korthak homeworld had no day-night cycle, so their soldiers had never learned to be more careful in the dark. Sergeant Kim slipped through their perimeter like a ghost, carrying nothing but primitive explosives and 3 decades of combat experience. The main supply depot for the northern continent held enough ammunition and food to supply the Korthak forces for 3 months. Kim placed his charges with the precision of an artist, timing the explosions to create maximum psychological impact. He did not just want to destroy their supplies. He wanted to introduce them to human warfare. The explosion lit up the night sky like a new sun. When the fires finally died down, the depot was gone, along with 3 supply ships and a communications relay. But more importantly, there were no survivors to report what had happened. The Korthak found only empty blast craters and the distinctive scorch patterns of human demolitions. Commander Grexoth stared at the tactical reports with growing confusion. His species had been fighting wars for 1,000 years, but this made no sense. The attack had been too precise, too professional. These were not desperate civilians with improvised weapons. This was military expertise. How many enemies are we facing? He asked his intelligence officer. Unknown, Commander. We detected no ships landing, no electronic signatures. The attack came from nowhere, and the attackers vanished completely. That's impossible. No one can attack a fortified position and leave no trace. But the intelligence officer had no answers. The attack had violated everything the Korthak understood about warfare. The second phase began 2 days later. Lieutenant Choi Yuna used the Indomitable's stealth capabilities to conduct hit-and-run attacks on Korthak patrol vessels. She would appear from nowhere, strike with surgical precision, and disappear before the enemy could respond. Each attack followed the same pattern. Identify a lone patrol ship, approach from its sensor blind spot, and destroy it completely with a single burst of concentrated fire. The Indomitable's experimental weapons could punch through Korthak armor like it was paper. and her stealth systems made her invisible to their sensors. After the 5th patrol ship disappeared without sending a distress signal, the Korthak fleet began to panic. Ships started traveling in groups, double-checking their sensor sweeps and jumping at shadows. The calm efficiency of their occupation was breaking down into nervous paranoia. Dr. Park worked with the Velthani to coordinate intelligence gathering. The crystal beings used their natural camouflage abilities to observe Korthak positions, reporting troop movements and supply deliveries through their harmonic network. Within a week, the humans knew more about Korthak operations than the Korthak commanders did. They're reporting equipment failures that our technicians cannot find. Elder Velmara translated from the intercepted Korthak communications. They request additional guards for routine patrols. Their soldiers are beginning to fear the darkness. Captain Lee smiled grimly. Fear is a weapon we've learned to use precisely. We're not just fighting their ships and soldiers. We're fighting their confidence. The psychological warfare reached its peak when Sergeant Kim was captured during a sabotage mission. He had been planting charges in a Korthak communications array when a patrol stumbled across him. Instead of running, he chose to be taken prisoner. Commander Grexoth finally had one of the mysterious attackers in his custody. The human was smaller than he had expected, with calm eyes and scarred hands that spoke of long experience with violence. The Korthak commander expected to break him easily through superior strength and intimidation. The interrogation lasted 3 hours. Commander Grexoth used every technique in the Korthak military manual, but the human seemed more annoyed than afraid. When threatened with pain, he showed no fear. When threatened with death, he seemed almost amused. "You do not understand," Kim said in perfect Korthak, which surprised his captors. "I am not afraid of you. I have fought enemies that would eat you for breakfast. I have survived battles that would give your entire species nightmares. And right now, I am exactly where I need to be." That was when the charges he had planted during his capture detonated. The explosion took out the entire command center, along with the communication arrays, the prisoner holding facility, and 3 barracks full of Korthak soldiers. Kim walked out of the wreckage carrying improvised weapons he had built from debris, leaving a trail of unconscious guards behind him. But he did not just escape. He broadcast a message on all Korthak frequencies. "This is Sergeant Kim Daesung of the Earth Defense Corps. You came here to teach your young soldiers how to break peaceful species. Consider this your first lesson in why that was a mistake. Class is now in session." The effect on Korthak morale was devastating. Their most secure facility had been destroyed from the inside by a single human who had allowed himself to be captured. The message spread through their fleet like a virus. These were not desperate civilians they were fighting, but professional soldiers from the species the galaxy called Deathworlders. Elder Velmara watched the Korthak panic with fascination. "I begin to understand why other species fear your kind," she told Dr. Park. "You do not just fight. You make warfare into an art form." "Not art," Dr. Park corrected gently. "Science. We study our enemies, learn their weaknesses, and exploit them with surgical precision, but we only do this to bullies who pick on peaceful species." The Velthani were learning something revolutionary. They did not have to be helpless. Under Sergeant Kim's guidance, they began using their harmonic abilities as weapons, creating frequencies that interfered with Korthak equipment and communication. Crystal beings who had never heard anything in their lives learned to fight back, but Commander Grexoth was not finished. The attacks had humiliated his forces and cost him dozens of ships and thousands of soldiers. More importantly, they had challenged the Korthak reputation for invincibility. If word spread that a handful of humans had made fools of an entire invasion fleet, other peaceful species might start to resist. He sent a priority message to the Korthak High Command. "Request immediate reinforcements. We are facing an enemy that fights unlike anything in our military doctrine. Recommend Supreme Admiral Thekvar take personal command of this situation." Captain Lee intercepted the message through the Velthani intelligence network. He knew what it meant. The real war was about to begin. "Sir," Lieutenant Choi reported from the bridge of the Indomitable, "long-range sensors are detecting hyperspace disturbances at the edge of the system. Multiple large contacts incoming." Captain Lee looked out at the night sky of Velthara Prime, where the lights of crystal cities were beginning to glow again as the Velthani rebuilt. The first phase of the war was over. They had proven that humans could fight the Korthak and win. Now they would have to prove it again, against odds that would test everything they had learned about warfare, courage, and what it meant to protect those who could not protect themselves. The Korthak were calling for help. It was time for Earth to do the same. The reinforcements that answered Commander Grexoth's call came in the form of Supreme Admiral Tekvar and the pride of the Korthak fleet. 27 warships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, led by the massive battleship World Render. Tekvar had never lost a campaign in 40 years of service. He viewed the situation on Velthara Prime as a minor embarrassment to be quickly corrected. Captain Lee Taiho watched the enemy fleet deploy through the Indomitable's sensors. The tactical situation had changed completely. 4 humans, however skilled, could not conduct guerrilla warfare against a fleet of this size. But Lee was not worried. He had already called for backup. The response came 18 hours later when 3 ships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. They were not as large as the Korthak fleet, but they represented the pinnacle of human military engineering. Vessels designed for one purpose only, killing other ships as efficiently as possible. The task force was led by Admiral Song Kyung-soo aboard the dreadnought Retribution. She was a small woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too many battles, but her voice carried absolute authority when she opened communications with Captain Lee. "Captain, what's the situation down there?" "The Velthani are still alive, Admiral. The Korthak are using this world as a training ground to teach other species what happens when they resist. We've been making their lives difficult, but now they've brought serious firepower." Admiral Song studied the tactical displays. The Korthak fleet outnumbered them 9-1, with heavier weapons and thicker armor. By every conventional measure, this should be an impossible fight. But humans had stopped caring about conventional measures a long time ago. "Very well, Captain. We'll handle the fleet. You keep protecting the civilians." The arrival of human reinforcements created panic throughout the galaxy. The Galactic Mediation Council sent urgent messages demanding human withdrawal. The Korthak Empire declared the situation a direct challenge to their sovereignty. Several neutral powers began moving their fleets to defensive positions, terrified that bringing human military forces into the region would destabilize the entire sector. Dr. Park Minji found herself serving as Earth's unofficial ambassador, explaining human intentions to increasingly frightened galactic observers through long-range communications. The conversation that followed would be studied in diplomatic schools for decades. "You're afraid we'll stay after this is over," she told the Galactic Council. "You're afraid we'll become conquerors ourselves. That fear tells us everything we need to know about how you've allowed the Korthak to operate. We're not here to build an empire. We're here to destroy one." Supreme Admiral Tekvar prepared for battle with confidence. Humans were dangerous individually, but they had never faced the coordinated might of a full Korthak fleet. His ships were built like fortresses, designed to absorb punishment while delivering devastating firepower. His strategy was simple: overwhelm the humans with superior numbers and firepower. The space battle that followed became a case study in the difference between Korthak and human military philosophy. The Korthak fought to achieve dominance through superior firepower and numbers. The humans fought to achieve total enemy destruction through superior coordination, technology, and tactical flexibility. Lieutenant Choi Yuna led a squadron of human fighters that had launched from the Retribution. The small craft moved like angry wasps around the massive Korthak ships, performing maneuvers that should have killed their pilots. Human pilots could withstand gravitational forces that would turn most species into liquid, and they used that biological advantage ruthlessly. "Target their sensor arrays first," Choi commanded her squadron over the communication net. "Blind them before we start the real attack." The fighters danced between the Korthak ships, their weapons striking with surgical precision. Each attack was coordinated down to the microsecond, creating cascading failures in the enemy's defensive systems. The Korthak found themselves fighting an enemy that moved too fast to track and struck too precisely to counter. On the ground, Sergeant Kim Daesung coordinated with Velthani resistance cells that had grown from frightened survivors into an effective intelligence network. The crystal beings used their harmonic abilities to jam Korthak communications while providing real-time targeting data to the human fleet. "All ground positions. This is Crystal Song Network." Elder Velmara's voice echoed through the harmonic communication system. Enemy reinforcements moving toward the northern mining complex. Recommend immediate orbital strike. The response came in the form of precision bombardment from the Retribution. The human dreadnought's weapons could strike targets the size of a building from orbit, guided by Velthani spotters who could coordinate instantly across the planet without using detectable technology. Admiral Song implemented a strategy that would later be called the Velthara Doctrine. Instead of trying to protect every position, human forces systematically eliminated the Korthak's ability to project power. Supply lines were severed, command structures were destroyed, and isolated units were picked off with methodical precision. The turning point came when human boarding parties struck the Korthak flagship. Supreme Admiral Thekvar found his command ship invaded by soldiers, who fought with a combination of advanced technology and primitive savagery that his tactical computers could not analyze. The humans moved through his ship like a force of nature. They used explosives in ways that violated safety protocols, fought hand-to-hand when their weapons ran out, and showed a complete disregard for their own safety that terrified the Korthak crew. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to enjoy the combat in ways that other species found deeply unsettling. "They're not trying to capture the ship," Thekvar's tactical officer reported in panic. "They're systematically destroying every critical system. They want to make sure we can never use this vessel again." When the boarding party finished their work, the world render was a floating wreck. Its weapons were destroyed, its engines were offline, and its command systems were reduced to sparking debris. The humans had not just defeated the flagship, they had made it into an example. The psychological impact spread through the Korthak fleet like a plague. Ship after ship reported equipment failures, communication blackouts, and mysterious explosions. Morale collapsed as word spread that humans did not just fight to win battles. They fought to ensure their enemies could never threaten anyone again. Captain Lee watched the space battle from the surface of Velthara Prime, where the crystal cities were beginning to glow with life again. The Velthani had learned something revolutionary. They were not helpless. Under human guidance, they had become active participants in their own defense. "The Korthak fleet is retreating," Lieutenant Choi reported from her fighter. 12 ships destroyed, the rest running for hyperspace. But Admiral Song's voice cut across the communication channel with words that would reshape galactic politics. "Negative. Pursuit authorized. We're not just driving them off. We're making sure they never come back." What followed was something the galaxy had never seen before. Human forces pursuing a defeated enemy not for conquest, but for justice. The human fleet chased the retreating Korthak ships across 3 star systems, destroying every vessel that had participated in the genocide. Supreme Admiral Thekvar, trapped aboard his crippled flagship, sent one final message before his ship was destroyed. "To all Korthak forces, avoid contact with human ships. These beings do not fight for territory or resources. They fight for principles we do not understand. They are more dangerous than any enemy we have ever faced." The message was intercepted by intelligence services throughout the galaxy. Within weeks, every major power knew that humans had not just defeated a Korthak fleet, they had eliminated it completely, pursuing the survivors until none remained. On Velthara Prime, Elder Velmara stood with Dr. Park Minji in the rebuilt Crystal Gardens, watching the night sky where human ships patrolled like guardian angels. "Your people have given us something we thought was lost forever," the Elder said, her crystal body glowing with warm blue light. "Not just our lives, but our hope." Dr. Park smiled, but her expression was thoughtful. "This is just the beginning, Elder. Word of what happened here will spread. Other peaceful species will ask for help. Other predators will test our resolve. And you will answer those calls?" "Every one of them," Dr. Park said quietly. "That's what humans do. We protect what we claim as ours, and we've decided to claim anyone who asks for mercy." Above them, the stars seemed brighter than they had in years. The galaxy was about to learn that when peaceful species pleaded for mercy, Earth did indeed send Deathworlders. But they were Deathworlders who had chosen to be guardians instead of conquerors. 6 months after the Battle of Velthara Prime, the galaxy was a different place. The news of what had happened spread faster than hyperspace travel, carried by traders, diplomats, and refugees who could barely believe what they had witnessed. The Korthak Empire, which had controlled 17 star systems for 3 centuries, collapsed within weeks. Their military reputation was shattered, their fleets scattered or destroyed, and their subject worlds were declaring independence faster than their remaining forces could respond. The empire that had once seemed unstoppable was now divided among dozens of warlord factions fighting over the scraps. Dr. Park Minji stood in the Velthara Research Institute, a new building that combined human engineering with Velthani crystal-growing techniques. The structure was both beautiful and functional, its walls singing with harmonic frequencies that enhanced both human and Velthani research capabilities. The latest reports show 43 species have requested protection from the humanitarian defense fleet, she told Captain Lee Teho, who had been promoted to admiral after the battle. Most of them are peaceful civilizations that have been targeted by predatory neighbors. Admiral Lee studied the galactic map, where new symbols marked the locations of species asking for help. Some were threatened by Korthak warlords trying to rebuild their empire through piracy and slavery. Others faced different predators who had watched the Korthak expansion with approval. "How many ships do we have available?" he asked. 12 human vessels and 6 Velthani support ships, Dr. Park replied. The Velthani have learned to build warships, though they still prefer to call them Harmony Defenders. Lee smiled at that. The Velthani had changed in remarkable ways since the invasion. They were still peaceful beings who preferred growing crystals to fighting wars. But they had learned that sometimes violence was necessary to protect peace. Under Sergeant Kim Dae-sung's training, they had developed their own military doctrine based on coordination and precision, rather than aggression. The first test of the new humanitarian defense fleet came when the Solarian Republic requested assistance. Their 3 star systems were being raided by Korthak warlord Vexmar, who had salvaged enough ships from the Imperial collapse to outfit a small fleet. He was using Solarian civilians as slaves to rebuild his forces. Admiral Lee led the response personally, taking a mixed fleet of human and Velthani ships to the Solarian system. The battle was brief and decisive. Vexmar's forces were expecting to face the same kind of weak resistance they had encountered before the humans arrived. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that combined human tactical doctrine with Velthani coordination abilities. The engagement lasted 47 minutes. When it was over, Vexmar's fleet was destroyed and the Solarian slaves were free. More importantly, word spread throughout the galaxy that the Human-Velthani alliance was not just defending Velthara Prime, they were actively hunting down anyone who preyed on peaceful species. Lieutenant Choi Yuna, now a full commander, established the first human-alien integrated military academy on Velthara Prime. Students from dozens of species arrived to study human tactical doctrine, but more importantly, to learn human philosophical approaches to warfare, when to fight, when to show mercy, and how to protect those who could not protect themselves. The key is not to become like your enemies, she told a class of mixed-species cadets. The moment you start enjoying violence for its own sake, you stop being a protector and become a predator. Humans learned this lesson through thousands of years of warfare. We're trying to teach it to you in a few months. The Academy's most famous graduate was a Velthani named Kinmer, who had lost his family in the original Korthak invasion. Under Commander Choi's guidance, he learned to channel his desire for justice into protective instincts. He became the first non-human to command a human warship, leading mixed crews with a combination of Velthani harmony and human tactical precision. Sergeant Kim Dae-sung found himself in a role that had never existed before in galactic history. A human military advisor to peaceful species. His students were not learning how to conquer, but how to resist conquest. Former victim species developed the confidence to stand up to predatory neighbors, knowing that the humanitarian defense fleet would support them. The galaxy's major powers watched these developments with growing alarm. The hegemony of Krell, a coalition of 7 militaristic species, saw human expansion as a threat to their own territorial ambitions. They had been planning their own campaigns against peaceful species when the humans intervened on Velthara Prime. The crisis came when the hegemony issued an ultimatum to Earth. Withdraw from galactic affairs and disband the humanitarian defense fleet, or face the combined might of their alliance. They backed up their demand with a massive fleet deployment to the edge of human space. Admiral Song Kyung-soo's response became legendary throughout the galaxy. Broadcasting on all frequencies, she delivered what became known as the Earth Doctrine. To those who would prey upon the peaceful, know that Earth is watching. To those who seek mercy, know that Earth will answer. To those who would threaten either, know that you have made a very poor choice. The message was followed by detailed intelligence reports showing human knowledge of hegemony military capabilities, troop dispositions, and strategic weaknesses. The files were so complete and accurate that several hegemony leaders realized their security had been compromised for years, without them knowing it. But the real shock came when 3 hegemony member species, the Vakari, the Talani, and the Zorith, announced they were withdrawing from the alliance to join the growing coalition of worlds protected by the humanitarian defense fleet. All 3 were species that had been dominated by more aggressive neighbors within the hegemony. We joined the hegemony for protection, announced Vakari Prime Minister Lauren. But protection from what? From the humans who help peaceful species defend themselves? We have decided we would rather be protected by those who respect our way of life. The hegemony found itself facing a choice: attack Earth and risk a war they might not win, or accept the new reality where peaceful species were no longer defenseless. After weeks of debate, they quietly withdrew their ultimatum and began adjusting to a galaxy where predatory expansion was no longer safe. The transformation was not just military, it was cultural. Species that had been victims for generations began to develop their own defensive capabilities. The galaxy's trade routes became safer, as pirates found themselves facing not just their intended victims, but human patrol ships that appeared without warning. Dr. Park Minji worked with researchers from dozens of species to develop new technologies that benefited everyone. Human engineering combined with Velthani harmonics, Solarian mathematical precision, and Vakari biotechnology created innovations that no single species could have achieved alone. The Velthara Research Institute became a symbol of what cooperation could accomplish. In its laboratories, former enemies worked side by side to solve problems that had plagued the galaxy for centuries. Diseases were cured, agricultural yields were improved, and new forms of art were created that combined the aesthetics of multiple species. 1 year after the Battle of Velthara Prime, Admiral Lee received a report that brought tears to his eyes. 17 new requests for protection had arrived in a single day, not from species facing immediate threats, but from civilizations that wanted to join the growing alliance of peaceful worlds. They're not asking us to save them, Dr. Park observed as they reviewed the applications. They're asking to be part of something larger, a community where peaceful species can thrive without fear. The formal ceremony took place in the rebuilt Crystal Amphitheater on Velthara Prime. Representatives from over 100 species gathered to sign the Charter of Peaceful Worlds, a document that established the principles of mutual protection and cooperation that would guide the galaxy's future. Elder Velmara, now the elected leader of the Alliance, spoke for all of them. 1 year ago, we called to the stars for mercy. We thought we were asking for salvation from our enemies. We did not realize we were asking for transformation of our entire galaxy. Captain Lee Taeho, now Fleet Admiral of the Humanitarian Defense Forces, stood before the assembled delegates and made a promise that would echo across the stars. To any peaceful species facing extinction, to any civilization threatened by predators, to any world where the innocent are in danger, you are not alone. Earth has heard your call. Earth will answer. The ceremony ended with something unprecedented in galactic history, a harmony sung by representatives of every species present. The Velthani provided the underlying structure, but each species added their own voice: human vocal cords, Solarian mathematical tones, Vakari biorhythms, and dozens of others. The song that rose from Velthara Prime was broadcast across the galaxy, carried by quantum communication arrays to every inhabited world. It was not a song of conquest or domination, but of protection and hope. In the deepest caves of distant worlds where peaceful species hid from predators, the song was heard and understood. In the darkest corners of space where pirates and slavers planned their next raids, the song was a warning. The galaxy had learned something new about Deathworlders. They were indeed the beings that other species feared,